Welcome to the SJSU Green Campus Podcast, a podcast about a range of sustainability and social issues that impact the SJSU campus and the broader community, hosted by the student interns from the San Jose State University Office of Sustainability.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the SJSU Green Campus Podcast. My name is Griselle, and my pronouns are she, her. Today, I am joined by Melissa Haswell from Australia. Melissa is a professor of practice and environmental well-being within the Office of the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Indigenous Strategy and Services, an honorary professor in the School of Geosciences at the University of Sydney. She's also professor of health and safety and environment at Queensland University of Technology, where our paths crossed in early 2020. So today in this podcast, we'll be discussing some of Australia's environmental challenges, as well as we'll dive into the communities of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and ending this podcast with some key takeaways from this episode. So Professor Haswell, how are you today?
I'm really good, Griselle. Thank you. And you?
I'm pretty good. It's kind of cold out here in San Jose. How is it in Australia?
It's very hot today. They're predicting very warm weather because we're in the summer.
Must be nice. So just to take it back to where we first met, I decided to study abroad in Australia in the year of 2020 out of all years. I went to Australia around the first week of February. I was supposed to stay there until July, so almost about 6 months. I had a few classes, and she was one of my professors for my sustainable environment classes. But unfortunately, once the pandemic started, I had to come back to California and finish my classes online. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to bring her onto this podcast today, just to get into more of the environmental challenges that Australia faces. So now I'll be passing it over to Professor Haswell for the land acknowledgements.
I'd just like to acknowledge that meeting you on the lands of the Jinibor people. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. The Jinibor people have actually been nurtured and cared and loved this land that I live on now. I'm privileged to live on for many, many thousands of years. So there's much to be learned and much gratitude and much unfinished business, which we'll speak about a bit later.
Thank you for that, Professor Haswell. So let's just dive right in to our podcast today. So tell me a little bit about your work with the universities, Professor Haswell.
My work, I absolutely love my job, and I like to start that way because I just feel like I have the most amazing job in the world. And other people can say the same thing, that's fine. But for me, I've been working in public health mainly over the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually American by birth, and I did my studies in Hiram College, which made me very adventurous. So after graduating from Hiram and also University of North Carolina, where I did bacteriology and immunology, I went to Imperial College in London and did my PhD working with South Indian fishing villages in Tamil Nadu. And I guess that was just such an amazing eye-opener. So please, I'm saying this because I shout out to all your students to take every opportunity you possibly can. Unfortunately, yours was cut short. That's yeah. But here I am now. I'll skip all the rest. Fast forward. Here I am now working at Sydney Uni within the portfolio. So we're the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Indigenous Strategy and Services, where I work with this incredible team of mostly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are guiding the university in terms of the strategies for unfinished business, as I mentioned before, around building voice, getting research education, community activities and engagement, and really amplifying the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I am so lucky to be able to be part of that portfolio, particularly at the interface between the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander strategy. It's called One Sydney, Many People. Mm. And the sustainability strategy of the university, both of which were launched in 2020 at the end of the year.
Oh, wow. So really recently.
Yeah. So that one of my main roles is working at that interface, maximizing the benefits of doing that work in synergy rather than separately, because to ignore the incredible knowledge and understandings of Indigenous Australians who have sustained this beautiful environment for 65,000 years was a very, very long time. We ignore that knowledge in our peril. So University of Sydney recognizes that. Yeah.
Wow,
so
that's great.
Another major activity that I do, I absolutely love. I work with an Aboriginal senior lecturer, Suzanne Kenny, and we deliver a unit of study where students in their third or fourth year or master's programs, honors, they come together, they learn about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture, etc., while they're planning a project that they do with communities on a priorities of the communities. So we're right now frantically preparing for semester when we'll have about 30 or 40 students, and COVID willing, we'll be going to the Torres Strait Islands for the third time.
Oh, wow.
And working with council, working with the traditional custodians and the health teams on basically resilience against climate change for health and well-being.
Wow, that sounds so cool. I just remembered that the semester doesn't start until February, right?
Yes.
I was like, oh, it started. So you guys will be in person this semester?
Well, fingers and toes crossed, yes. So we'll actually start semester February 17th and 19th in the pre-semester week with an intensive workshop about empowerment and well-being that was designed by Aboriginal people it's a phenomenon called family well-being. There's quite a big literature on that program. And to me, it's the best way by reflecting on yourself and understanding yourself. It helps you a lot in being able to understand, not just know history, but actually understand what history means for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, very similar to the US and Canada. And be able to work in positive ways and in empowering ways with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that's about to launch in a couple of weeks. And we'll be in the field, hopefully, face-to-face, hopefully.
Let's cross.
Yeah. But we have Plan B and Plan C. So if we can't travel, the show will still go on. And I happen to be north of the border in Queensland, so it's compared to the Sydney students, it's easier for the borders won't close. So we'll still be able to go up and put students in front of Zooms with community members.
Oh, so it'll be your Plan B would be remotely, hopefully?
Yep. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And we know that works. We've done it a couple of times. It's not the same, but it still is an amazing experience for students.
Definitely. Yeah. All right, so let's dive into one of our questions, which is, what are some of Australia's biggest environmental challenges?
Yeah, so that question is a really big one. Just to set the scene, Aboriginal people are known to have been in Australia for 65,000 years, at least. So the archaeological records go back that far. And some of the stories that have been passed on through generations go back to the Ice Age, the last Ice Age, when sea level was very different than it is today.
Yeah. So higher now.
Yes. Essentially, 1788, so that would be 234 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
It's much more recent than when Columbus decided that he discovered America.
Yeah.
Cool. Decided that this land was British owned. So it was empty land. They call it terra nullius. The idea that no one owned the land that we now call Australia. And it's while there were some positive, slightly positive things, etc., in some of the interactions in the early days, many negative and positive, but from about 1816 forward, that all changed. And the governor at the time, Macquarie, basically unleashed a war. So we don't talk about its frontier wars. It's not fully in Australia's consciousness, although like Columbus Day, we have our Australia Day, which is actually the day of the landing of Captain Cook. So it's felt very, very similarly here. And it just occurred last week. So it's high.
So recent.
Trying to change the day is a big challenge, a big issue. And I guess one might not think, oh, that's not an environmental challenge. It certainly is, because coming to terms with the history of the interaction with Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, is a big step to understanding and really seeing what has happened in those 230 years, which is enormous environmental degradation, deforestation, ecosystem damage, our water supply, salination of soils. So you could go across every aspect of the environment and say, yep, really mess things up terribly. And I guess for challenges rather than the problems will be, how do we work forward, and particularly on climate change, because we're still digging up coal. We're still, the government is still pushing forward a gas-led recovery from COVID, which means projects on fracking in the Northern Territory, in Western Australia, in Queensland. So it's almost as if climate change doesn't exist the way our policies are at present. And coal mining is still growing, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Much to the detriment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at the forefront. The Torres Strait Islands are already experiencing sea level rise and loss, erosion, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Aboriginal people are experiencing in the Northern Territory, for example, heat waves that are getting unbelievable.
I remember how hot it was when I went. I was like, oh my gosh, and everyone talked about the sunscreen, and it was my first time ever being in the heat in like January like that. I was like, it's so hot.
Yes. And humid too.
I do recall them talking a lot about the rising sea levels, especially in the class I was taking. That's one of the projects we created, but it was something that I think everyone talked about, of how important it was, or like raising more awareness around it.
Yes. Yeah, many Australians don't realize that the beautiful environment we live in on the coast, it doesn't last very long. If you go west from here or north from the south, we're the driest continent on Earth. Yeah, and you wouldn't know that in Brisbane, where it's lovely and
yeah. They would say like it's mostly in the middle, like right where I think it was Perth area when they said that. Like, is that in the middle?
No, it'd be Alice Springs in the middle.
Oh, I think so. That's what they said. Like that would be like the driest parts of Australia.
Yeah. So you would have heard of Ayers Rock, the English name, but Uluru is the Aboriginal name for that. Amazing. It is an amazing place. I was able to go there with a group of Aboriginal people from Yarrabah in Cairns, and we went there. We were going to Perth for a workshop, and it was just unbelievable. So spiritual.
So many places I wanted to go that I wasn't able to see.
Yeah. Well, I guess the challenge we have is really to grow up, put our big person pants on, and really get together as a nation and say, we have to lead now. We have to lead ourselves into a much better, more responsible way of healing our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, and that all the trauma, etc. If you can also think, we also need to work together, listening to that knowledge and that wisdom to be able to heal country as well. So standing behind, not running what we think of as ahead and dominating, but slowing those down and going, what do we really want for our children?
Exactly. All right. So when it comes to Native peoples across the world, are some of the most important leaders in combating climate change and preserving the environment. How has the Australian environmental community worked with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to help preserve Australia?
Oh, thanks for that question. If we look back 10 years ago, I would say not very well. Yep. But there has been an awakening. So there have been times of conflict between environmental groups and Aboriginal people's rights and voices. I would say we've made huge steps forward in that. There's many things that are now implemented in everyday life for people who are conscious of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, who have a much deeper understanding of what history really means, not what you learned in primary school for 20 minutes in between history and Christopher Columbus. But really starting to understand in a much more deep way the incredible value that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people bring to understanding the environment and working to protect and promote it. So now you hear acknowledgements of country so often. People open with meetings. People go around before you begin saying, where are you, the land you're on, and the traditional custodians. So I think that there's a much more strong realization. So every March now, you see Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people right at the front, and speeches, places where people gather and listen, very often highlighted, opened by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. And that is really wonderful. It's both symbolic, which is really important, like that symbol of we follow you. Is but also increasingly there is more Indigenous voices that are promoted by the environmental community and saying to government, listen to these on the Great Barrier Reef, which is in Big Pool. listen to these voices on the Murray-Darling Basin, which is a bit like the Mississippi River in America, that has been so damaged by farming over extraction, and not leaving water for the river itself. So we've kind of go back and forth related to the policies of the government. But what the environmental community is saying, we need this all the time, not just when we have a government that likes to listen. We need it all the time. One of the really important movements happening now is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So I might give you the link if listeners want to have a listen to that, because it's an invitation to Australians to walk forward together and address both the health, the social, and the environmental challenges. So there's a lot of support for that statement, although the government waxes and wanes as to how much they're willing to enable a voice in Parliament. Essentially, that's what it's about.
Oh.
And just to say, is in terms of environmental groups, like there are groups particularly spurred on by fighting the gas and the coal mining. For example, here in Queensland, the Adani mine, it's got a different name now, but it's essentially the same, which started out to be, it would have been one of the biggest coal mines on the planet. Oh, wow. But through enormous work and pressure, and particularly led by the Wangan and Jagalingou people, who are the traditional custodians there, that although the mine isn't stopped, it's vastly smaller than the original plans. In one of the wonderful youth groups, so we have the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, AYCC, and within that coalition, originally within, but has now grown enormously on its own, is the SEED, SEED, the SEED. Oh.
Yeah. What's that?
So that is actually young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people doing incredible work with communities, because often Aboriginal communities don't know the whole stories, and particularly in places like the Northern Territory. So they go around and they ensure people understand what gas mining means. If you want to have gas fields everywhere, what does it really mean?
Yeah.
And just helping people understand, and also speak in government forums and hearings from the community about how whether community supports or rejects these projects. So they are an incredible group of people. I encourage you to go to their website. It's a
really cool. I'll definitely add that to the show notes as well.
Sure. Great. And so many other things.
So what do you think the Australian universities and other institutions can do to promote the voices of Aboriginal and Torres Islander people?
Sure. So there is so much. I'll just start by saying so much, because I think universities is where our young people not only learn, but they also develop their own ideas, their own knowledge, their own voices. And our One Sydney, Many People strategy is quite unique in the way that we are committed, and we're working vigorously to put in place ways to enable students to kind of go through some of the emotional journey of going from, feeling guilty, not wanting to know because it hurts to know sometimes, not really coming to terms with what it means to be Australian when we actually acknowledge our history, but going beyond the guilt into commitment and awareness in a way that's positive and empowering for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So thinking about working with not working on.
Yeah.
And doing with, not doing for. It's a real transition that students need to go through because they aren't aware of the whole story and they don't realize the strength and the power in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the resilience, the incredible survival and growth, and the culture that is so important for us to listen to. So I think first and foremost is to actually for university to increase the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students,
yes,
and especially staff, because the way they teach will be quite different from non-Indigenous people. It doesn't mean not just in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues, but in everything, in every discipline, there are important messages. But also for all professors and lecturers and everything to be integrating Aboriginal knowledge into their teaching. So you can't have just a handful of people do it. It's everybody's responsibility.
It's a teamwork effort.
It's everything, yes. And the thing about it is you're enhancing curriculum at the same time. So getting over the idea of, oh, we don't have time for that. And you go, no, you've got priorities. Yeah. So, and that's a wonderful thing for staff, because when they find out and they actually do their own research on this, they actually find it really, really amazing. It opens their eyes, because they didn't have an education either that did that properly. So I think in the teaching, in the research, so I think it's pretty set now, although we do have work to do around research with collaboration with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, gaining more voice and more leadership in the research by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, rather than having them tacked on to tick some boxes and to actually require, and actually be built with the space. So the co-design rather than doing for. But probably most importantly, and also giving students experiences. So it's one thing to sit in a classroom and learn all that. But what I love about the unit that I'm privileged to help coordinate is that can be turned into action for the students, and they can actually do something. So that helps with the sort of feelings of, I want to do things, I don't know how to start. It actually enables that starting.
So more like hands-on learning in a way. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. And there's always things you can do. You don't have to go all the way to the Torres Strait. We always emphasize the students is, 2 kilometers up the road, there's an Aboriginal community within the town of Redfern, which is really historical, and they learn locally, and that's really important too. So they don't just recognize people living remotely, they also realize that a very large number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people live in urban areas and regional areas. So, but I guess this culminating in the final thing, which is really the voice. So, and amplifying and demonstrating and leading the country in ways of working with, understand, doing things differently, and reawakening in everyday life what it means to be an Australian.
Wow.
Yeah. This is what being Australian is the fact that we live on a place that was loved and nurtured and cared for 65,000 years, and really let that come home and change the way, fundamentally how we view ourselves.
Yeah, letting it sink in.
Yeah.
So what are some last minute takeaways, key takeaways that you'd like the audience to take away from this podcast?
Yeah. So I think thinking that quite a few will be students.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Quite a few will be lecturers, professors, and all.
Yes.
You have different words. But that it's this is not a chore. I guess what I want to say mostly is you will find that working, listening, understanding, learning, seeking out the truth, the real truth, not the one that's kind of glossed over and candied over, is actually empowering. Like you don't have to hide it anymore. You don't have to run away from the truth. And I think in dealing with climate change and all these issues, we all have climate anxiety. Let's say it. Let's talk about it. Don't hide within ourselves. We're all in this together. We're all, And one of the things I say to my students when I start lectures and stuff around this, I ask how, and I probably did to you too, I asked the group, how often do you think about climate change?
Yes, I remember.
And I start out with every 6 months, never have, and now no one says never, and more are saying 24/7. And I say, actually, you know what? That is not healthy. That is not a good space. And you need to work on that. You need to be able to have a place for that, but you also need to have a place for your own growth and your own joy and your own recognition of the wonderful aspects of being human. It's not all negative. And one of the ways of doing that is to be with people that share your values, that understand the big tasks that we have. But it feels lighter if we allow ourselves self-care, because really everyone listening to this is a leader. You are a leader. You will know more than 99% of the world about these challenges, and your education, your knowledge, your experience, and your ears will make you an amazing leader. So that's probably the take-home message I have.
Thank you so much, Professor Haswell, for joining me all the way from Australia and taking the time out of your day to record, even though we're in different days, we're in different hours of the day. You're still able to make it. So thank you so much for joining me. It was so great connecting. And to everyone else, thank you so much for listening to the 4th episode of the SJSU Green Campus Podcast, a podcast by the San Jose State University Office of Sustainability. To learn more about these topics discussed in today's show notes, we'll be linking all of the links that Professor Haswell will give to us. And just make sure to check out the episode description to find those links. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SJSU Green Campus to stay connected. For more information about the SJSU Office of Sustainability, check out our website. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll catch you next time on the SJSU Green Campus Podcast.